Hi, today we are going to take a triad and we're going to learn how to voice in four-part harmony. So a triad here has the three notes. We have the root note and then the third above and the fifth above. And then we're going to take those notes and spread them into four voices. The four voices of what would typically be a choral voicing. So when we say four-part harmony, we mean four voices. So traditionally that would mean the soprano voice, which has the range of C up to G, middle C that is. There's the alto voice, which goes from the G below up to the C on the third space of the treble clef. We have the tenor voice that goes from the C on the second space of the bass clef and all the way up to top G, three ledger lines above the bass clef. So that's actually the same note as the G on the second line of the treble clef. So the tenor goes quite high. And then we have the bass voice that goes from the F then up to the middle C. Okay, so they are our voice ranges. And now let's see how we're going to take the triad and now voice it into the four-part harmony style. Now, we have three notes and we have four voices, so one of them is going to get doubled. We have to pay a lot of attention to that because if we double the wrong note, we'll get into trouble all the time. So, okay, let's have a look. First of all, the root note of the chord goes to the bass voice. So that's nice and simple. The root note goes to the bass voice. Okay, so we're going to be spreading the notes out across two clefs, the bass clef and the treble clef. All right, the next important part is the third. The third of the chord, so we call it the third of the chord, we mean the middle note of the triad. It's a very important note because it determines whether a triad is major or minor. So at the moment we have C major triad, so that's C up to an E natural. But if that was C up to E flat, then that would be C minor. But today we are working with not the C minor, we'll just stick with C major and keep it nice and simple. All right. So, where are we going to place the third note? Well, here in my example, I've given it to the alto voice. The third of the chord can go to any of those three upper voices, so tenor, alto, and soprano. They can mix around, so you can decide. Okay, now that leaves the fifth. And again, the fifth can go to either the tenor, the alto, or the soprano. In this case, I've given the fifth to the soprano. So we've distributed the three notes. Which one's doubled? Because one of them has to get doubled because we have four voices and three notes. I've doubled the root note and given the root note to the tenor. So the tenor and the bass share the same note. Okay, so that spreads these three notes out into an acceptable arrangement for the four voices. And note that where I've placed each of the four voices fits with where the range of the notes allows. So that G, yep, that fits in the range. The E, yep, that fits into the alto range. And the tenor there fits into the tenor range, etc. So for example, I couldn't have the tenor voice above that top G. So that would be stepping outside of the range. All right. So that's one example. Now there are lots of examples for how this can be done. Here is another example. So same chord, but different arrangement of the notes. So here, the bass voice has the root note. Here, the tenor voice has the third of the chord, the E. So I've given the third of the chord to the bass, to the tenor voice. So the third cannot be doubled. You can double either the root note or the fifth, but you can't double the third. So you can only have the third in one of the voices. I've given the G to the alto, and then I've doubled the root note to the soprano, the top C. Here is another arrangement, and this time I've shown how to voice it using minims where stems are involved. So you can see there is a formal stem arrangement. The bass voice has the stems down, tenor stems up, because we have two separate melodies, if you like, on the one stave. The alto has the stems down, and the soprano has the stems up. Now, here is another example, and you'll see this last one here. I've made a mistake with this, because one of the things that you must not do is have more than an octave gap between either the tenor and the alto or the alto and the soprano. So at the moment I have the tenor voice is on the G, and then the alto steps beyond that octave to the next C up, which is an octave and a half. So that's not allowed. Now, what if I brought the C down an octave? Well, that's no good either, because now I have more than an octave gap between the alto and the soprano. So you have to be very careful. So the idea, best way to deal with this one is, let's see, what else could we do? We could move this note to the G. Now that's okay, because I have an octave gap between the tenor and the alto. That's okay. So that would be fine. Ultimately, there's an ideal of wanting to bring the voices as close together as possible, because when they're voiced closely, then they blend nicely. But of course, when you're arranging lots of chords and lots of parts and lots of melodies, you can't always have the most ideal setting of each of the chords. But that's a basic rundown on how to take 3-note triad and spread the notes out into 4 voices. So a couple of careful things to remember. Do not double the third. So we can't have the thirds. If I have a look at this last example, if I put the alto voice onto the E there, I've got 2 E's. So I've doubled the third of the chord. So that's generally not accepted. There is an exception when you look at an interrupted cadence, but generally speaking, that's not allowed. So better leave that up on the G. Okay, don't have more than an octave gap between the 3 upper voices. You can have more than an octave gap between the bass voice and the tenor voice. You can see that there. That's acceptable. But important to keep the 3 upper voices close together. And that should help you, and you should be able to now voice triad into 4-part harmony.